Hello there, guys. This is Christy Lewis from Dostoevsky in Space. Today I'm bringing you my favorites of 2024. Very excited. This is one of my favorite videos of the year. I usually film this quite a bit earlier in the year, closer to the beginning of December, but I just didn't have time this year because I always want to make sure I get it out to you in a reasonable amount of time. But this year I did not have time. First of all, we have Bunny by Mona Awad, which is such a mind game. I read this for We Love Jenny because Jennifer Brooks, who was one of my best friends here on BookTube, passed away early in January of this year, 2024. And so I read a bunch of books because she recommended them or she loved them. Or she just mentioned them and made me curious about them. And this was one of those. So it has a special place in my heart for that reason. It was really, I would say, immersive and unusual. I've never read anything like this. It's an exploration of creativity and kind of how tooth and nail relationships between women can get when you don't get to choose who you're around, which I feel like is very common. Like, in America today, it seems like there's a lot of people who don't know how to be around people that they don't like, that they disagree with on things. They don't know how to work together with them and around them. And this is a book about that, about how hard that is. It's about creativity and how real it feels to creative people. It's very adult. I would say it's like sort of horror-y. There's horror elements, but it's almost like a literary horror, but it's like incredibly immersive, and like I was so entertained. I really enjoyed this. We're following a writer who's in an MFA writing project, I think, along with 3 other girls who appear to be in a cult, and it's like almost like a sex cult, and she just cannot get along with them. But then at one point, she ends up going to a party with them, and the real story kind of starts there. Kind of their interactions are what the novel is made up of, and it's kind of surreal at times. It's like really, like, at times not realism. It's like very surreal, but just so entertaining. I really enjoyed this. Definitely a 5-star read. I'm excited to read more by Mona Awad. She's like really very unique. I mean, I don't read a ton of modern stuff, so maybe she's not as unique as I think, but like really I've never read anything like this. So this really did intrigue me, and I want to read more from her and more modern stuff, maybe because of this. Very imaginative. Really enjoyed it. And also, it does accurately represent today's epidemic of loneliness. That was another thing that I thought it did so well and I liked about it. Young people today, they have trouble making connections. Yeah, so it's about that as well. Loneliness. Okay, next, let's move on to The Long Loneliness by Dorothy Day, which is the autobiography of this Catholic worker party. Is she a saint? I don't know. I feel like they're trying to make her a saint. Maybe the Catholic Church is trying to make her a saint right now. Anyways, she is well known for her affinity with the Workers' Party, and especially as well with anti-war movements. Very like peace loving, I would say. What I really thought was cool about her, it was really a pleasure just to follow her around. The cool thing about an autobiography specifically is you see the person in their own words, their life experience. There's nothing between you and them. And I feel like she got her point across very well by just living it. And you really get to know her. And it's a pleasure to get to know her. It kind of enriched my understanding of how Catholics view saints and communing with the saints. It's like, well, if we're going to be in heaven with them forever, we should get to know them. and because they're going to be our friend. They're already our friends, but they will be our friends even more when we're in heaven with them for eternity, you know, that kind of a thing. Social activist. She was a Marxist for a lot of her young life. And you kind of follow her evolution from growing up in a not religious family, but she was kind of attracted to religion, to being a part of the Marxist movement and kind of some of the disillusionment that came along with that. And then she becomes a mother. And at that point, she decides she wants to go into the Catholic Church and become a Catholic because of the benefits that gives young children. And she becomes a believer kind of through motherhood, which is really interesting. And there were so many really moving quotes. Like, she spent time in prison, and she just had these really thoughtful thoughtful ruminations on the harder things of life. And what's really admirable about her is she, after becoming a Catholic, she ends up kind of creating this movement of being one with the working class, like Jesus. Like, she says the working and poor are very close with Jesus because he also was a working poor man. And so she lives with them. Anytime she gets money, she's like giving it away. They live on these farming communes, she and her friends, and they cooperatively work on this farm. And there's like a certain amount of hours that they work per day together, and they just keep people fed, clothed, and housed who need it. And so basically they're all poor together. I mean, it really takes all types. She's running a ministry to people who, for whatever reason, can't do like material, who cannot gather material wealth in their lives. Some of them are disabled and things like that. And she just really makes her home with people who are needy. And together they provide for the needs of the needy. They don't have a lot of excess, but they see that God provides. It's really, really interesting. Really, it was really touching to read her life story. I think she's like really cool. Legendary social activist. Really, really enjoyed this. The second half became a little bit too like name heavy, and it was hard to follow some stuff, but there was just so much good stuff in there. I loved it so much. All of these books that I'm talking about are 5 stars or just under. Like, I have a complaint or two about them maybe, but it's living on with me. It sticks with me. It stays with me. There's just so much merit to them. That is The Long Loneliness, and I have a quote from it. So many quotes. I highlighted this entire book. People have so great a need to reverence, to worship, to adore. It is a psychological necessity of human nature that must be taken into account. We do not like to admit how people fail us. Even those most loved show their frailty and their weaknesses. And no matter how we may will to see only the best in others, their strength rather than their weakness, we are all too conscious of our own failings, and we recognize them in others. She has this reverence and realizes eventually that she's been leaning on God all her life without wanting to actually in name kind of associate herself with God. And she realizes, I've been reverencing heroes, just like sometimes she'll like overgeneralize about people and be like, everybody reverences humans. But I think it is true that in humans, a lot of humans at least have a reverence gene almost, where it's like we have to reverence someone or something, whether it's a political leader or, a celebrity or an author or, we have somebody, or a sports star. We have somebody that we idolize in some fashion. And really where that reverence belongs is to God. So there's so many really like that, and the whole sainthood about Catholicism. It just gave me so much food for thought, and I enjoyed it. And it's been almost a year since I've read it now, because I read it in January and February, and I still just have this really vivid memory of it. So, okay, moving on. The Sparrow by Mary Doria Russell. This was also extremely unique. This was a Catholic sci-fi novel. Never read anything like that. I was so riveted. I cried. I laughed. I think what I loved about this the most were the theological conversations that were happening. So what it is basically there has been a planet. People have realized here on Earth, there's some kind of alien species living on this planet. And the Catholic Jesuits are the first ones to kind of organize and go and meet. They're like, we need to meet all of God's creatures. We need to meet these creatures that God has created, basically. They fund this mission to this planet, and not all of the people who go are Catholic Jesuits though, but they are, a lot of them, very close, and they work very closely. And the conversations between these people, like on the spaceship there and while they're among the aliens, and like, it's just, and even before, as they're getting to know each other, their relationships are so rich. I was just so riveted. This was like, I knew it as I was reading it. I was like, this is going to be a favorite of the year. It was very emotional, and I just would follow. I felt like I will follow this. There's a particular character, a particular priest, that I'm like, I would follow him anywhere, which actually turned out to be wrong, because the second book I actually DNF'd. So I didn't actually follow him everywhere, but the first book I was really like, I will follow you anywhere. You're so cool. I really enjoyed this. Now, I guess I would have some criticisms for it. I didn't agree with it about everything. Like, some of the things that it proposes as answers to the problems of the world, I was like, I don't think that actually is an answer. But it was pretty remarkable, because this was published in like the 80s or something. There were so many things that were interesting, like the Pope being a Jesuit. Nobody saw that coming. And then now we have a Jesuit Pope, it was interesting also learning about the Jesuits, because I don't know that much about, honestly, what separates all the different types of churches and Protestant versus Catholic. I know some of the differences, but honestly, that's more of like a history thing, and I don't know my history all that well. So this was really interesting for that reason. It was like a deep dive into the Jesuits. Very like practical. A lot of them are very liberal on the political spectrum and focused on the social gospel. So there were some things that, as I would say, I don't really fall in line with that. So, but honestly, I enjoyed it so much. It was just such a good story, and highly recommend. Definitely recommend. It doesn't have to be a perfect book for me to be like, I loved this and it's a favorite of the year. Absolutely loved this so much. Highly recommend. And I think I read this whole thing physically, which a lot of times I will listen to. It's a long book. A lot of times if it's a long book, I'll listen to a lot of it. I read this entire thing physically. I'm pretty sure it was that good that I spent months on it, reading it. One of my favorite sci-fis that I think I've ever read, and that's saying something because I really do like sci-fi. Next, The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. I actually have this book here. A lot of books that I read are from the library, or they're ebooks, or they're audiobooks, so I don't usually get to actually hold up a book. Woo! I'm missing my rings. I don't know where they went. I feel naked without them. Anyways, The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson, which Stephanie gave me this year. Thank you so much, Stephanie. I'm so glad to finally have a physical copy. And it's my favorite kind, the big floppy paperback. So this is actually a reread for me. I've read this twice before. I think only twice. Maybe 3 times, but I think only twice. It's like a perfect fantasy. I just enjoyed this so much more than I was anticipating. When I finished rereading this series the last time for Stormalong 2020, I did not think that I would probably read them all again. But as soon as I started rereading The Way of Kings, I was like, this is why I love this. So we are following 4 characters. Basically, this is set on the land of Roshar, and it's part of a greater universe. Like, Brandon Sanderson is creating his own kind of Avengers like Cosmere universe. It's called the Cosmere. This is a particular planet in the Cosmere. It's a great place to start if you want to start with Brandon Sanderson's magnum opus. They are quite long, but they're very readable. Like, they will just suck you along. At least that's a lot of people's experiences, and you can see the Goodreads ratings are just like astronomically high. So we're introduced to 4 very important characters in this book, like a lot more. There's a large cast, but we're seeing from mainly 4 characters' perspectives. In this book in particular, each book of the 10-book series is going to be focusing on one character specifically and their backstory so that we get to know them better. And book 1 is my favorite character's book, Kaladin. And I just feel like he's just really beloved and relatable, and there's lots of characters that are beloved and relatable. Everybody has like redemption arcs, and everybody has fans. There's every character has a fan out there because they're really well done. Like, it's really strong relationally, really strong character wise, really strong world building wise, Brandon Sanderson is such a great world builder. So, and this has a pretty epic scope, as you can probably just tell by the length. So basically, we're on Roshar, and a king has been assassinated in like prologue. There's like 5 prologues in here. One of the prologues, a king is assassinated by one character who is a perspective character. We see from his perspective several times in this book and in other books in the series. And then another character, my favorite, we meet him. He's a surgeon's apprentice, and he ends up fighting for reasons that are disclosed in the story. And then he ends up becoming a slave. And then he's forced to fight, even though not fight anymore. It's like a really terrible position he's put into called bridge running, which is basically like arrow fodder. He's put at the front lines. Basically, he's there to distract from the real fighters. But his grit and his determination and his character are so that he ends up standing out. And that's obviously not the end of his story. And so his character line, Kaladin is that character's name, is just so amazing to follow. He really takes a journey, and I think he's really riveting to follow because he's still in development. He's so young. He doesn't have a huge past, but his past is very tragic, as you could tell by ending up in slavery and ending up on the bridge cruise. And he also has depression, so you're just really rooting for sad boy Kaladin. I don't want to talk about the magic too much because part of the series is the unfolding of the magic. It's a very slow unfolding of the magic system. It's not like Mistborn where right away you're like, oh, I understand the magic system. It's not like that at all in Way of Kings. It's much slower. It's not really, I mean, the magic systems are important, but this is much more about character, in my opinion, than Mistborn is. And that's, I think, why I fell in love with it and why I love it so much. So if I haven't convinced you yet to give it a try, I think once you start getting into Kaladin's point of view, it's really easy to just get sucked in. And I read this in like 2 weeks the first time I read it, and it's gigantic, and that's really fast for me. I take months to read anything. So I read this really fast, and I would highly recommend it. I'm loving the series, and the 5th book in the series, which is the end of one arc. There's 2 arcs in the 10-book series. So the 5th book is coming out, and I got it for Christmas. It's sitting over here. It's called Wind and Truth. So this reread was wonderful for me. I really enjoyed it. 10 out of 10. Would recommend. Super, super great. Okay, next, another book that I own. Woo! Also gifted to me by a friend. Midnight Sun by Stephanie Meyer. Victoria gave this to me for Christmas, and it was on my wish list, so I was really excited to actually own it. It totally fell apart because it's gigantic, and a paper bag of this size will not survive very long. But and also I was reading it while I was in the Dominican Republic, so this as an experience was exquisite. It's super long, and I soaked it up and loved every second of it. This is Twilight from Edward's perspective. So it's the first book, Twilight from Edward's perspective, which is why it's quite a bit longer, because Edward doesn't sleep. And there's a lot of things that happen, a lot of action scenes that happen in book 1 and in movie 1 that we don't see because we follow Bella. Bella is the female in this romantasy. She's the female lead. Edward is the male lead. Edward is a vampire. He's a vegetarian vampire who sparkles in the sunlight. That's why he can't go in the sunlight where anybody can see him, because then they would see that he sparkles. So it's Stephanie Meyer's take on the vampire legend. And it's a super fun romantasy. If you've never given it a shot and you're a romantasy fan, check it out. Try it. It's definitely worth it if you're a romantasy fan. And it has the pomegranate on the cover because it retells the story of Hades and Persephone in a sense. Each of the books are a classic retelling in a sense, because Stephanie Meyer I believe she has a degree in English, so she read a lot. of literature. As she was writing this series, that literature informed her stories. And she wrote these based on a dream too, which is really cool. But anyways, yeah, I feel like this was a response to a lot of the criticisms of Twilight, because there were a lot of criticisms of Edward, how he's kind of controlling, but it's in a way that you just have to get to know Edward. Like, I think he has a lot of anxiety, and that's portrayed really clearly. Like, the feeling of anxiety is portrayed extremely well in this book. You're seeing everything from his perspective. The most precious thing in life to him is Bella, and she's so breakable, and she has these immortal vampires surrounding her who want to kill her, and he's like, how can you survive? You're so fragile. So he just worries about her a lot. And I think throughout the series, he kind of lets go somewhat and improves in that way. But I feel like this book was a response to the people who said Edward is really unhealthily controlling. And so she was like, well, let me show you things from Edward's point of view. There were specific things that happened in here that were like, oh yeah, she's read the hate comments. She knows all about what people are saying. So that was interesting. It was like very, not meta. Meta's not the right word, but anyways, yeah. It was so fun. I love seeing, there was a lot of really, I read it long enough ago that I don't have any of the quotes like picked out for you guys. But this was well worth a read if you enjoyed Twilight in your heyday of being a Ute. If you have never read the Twilight series and you're my age or older, I wouldn't say like start now, but if you are younger than me, especially if you like romantasy, definitely give the series a try. I think it will suck you in. That's my opinion. Yeah. Really 10 out of 10 experience. Once again, I'm excited to see Victoria reading this. She's continuing the series. I think this month she's reading a book in the series. So I'm so excited for her to get to this. So fun. Okay, next, The Commissar Vanishes by David King. This I read for Red September, which was an exploration of communist history in September. This last September was our first one. And this was fascinating. It's about the manipulation of photographs, mainly, by Stalin's, what would you call them? He has like it's not like he has this gigantic team of people working to change all these pictures, but it is kind of like that, but it's basically all of the photographic manipulation that happened during Stalin's reign. So you can see here, there's a picture of 4 guys. Stalin is one of them. And then there's a picture of same picture, but there's only 3 guys. Same picture, there's only 2 guys. Same picture, there's now only Stalin, because these guys were all picked off by Stalin. So it shows kind of how Stalin is trying to present himself as Lenin's heir, even though they barely knew each other. Like, Stalin was a nobody during Lenin's heyday. And it was interesting reading about the tactics that they used to kind of manipulate the photography, because this was obviously before Photoshop. And it was a little bit creepy, honestly. Some of the pictures that basically it's a book of the pictures before and after the photographic manipulation. Sometimes they would take a crowd that was actually not that large and then slit a crowd from a different picture and paste it in so that it looked like they had a bigger crowd at this, speaking engagement by one of the communist leaders. It's interesting stuff like that. And you learn a lot about the people that surrounded Stalin and then were, it was really interesting and enjoyable, honestly. I didn't need an audiobook for this. It was really easy reading and I flew through it. Really, really enjoyed this. Highly recommend if you're a Soviet Union history person. This was great. This was really, really good. Okay, next why don't we do Foster by Claire Keegan? So this is a very short set in Ireland, and we are following a couple who has lost their son. And so one of their neighbors who has a lot of kids is going to have another baby. And so they take one of the girls. This couple who lost their son takes in one of the girls from this family of many, many kids. And basically they foster her until the mom has the baby and they can bring this girl back to her home. It's like really short, but it says so much in the few words, and like the actual writing itself is so expressive. I was amazed at how much she could say without saying it, just through description, and your heart is just like bleeding. It's like cracked and broken on the floor as you're hearing the story of this girl. But it's also like so light-filled and heartwarming. It's just a warm book. It's a very warm book. So I'm really excited to read more Claire Keegan. Because of the topic, this is probably going to be my favorite. I'm just like so fascinated. I want to hear all the fostering stories, because that is something we want to do. And this one really just touched my heart. It was so special and so wonderful. Highly recommend if you haven't checked out Claire Keegan yet. It's really, really beautiful. As good as Chekhov, says David Mitchell. What more do you need to know, right? Okay, next, let's talk Heaven by Mieko Kawakami. This is a Japanese novel shortlisted for the 2022 International Booker Prize. I just feel like Japanese literature, they know like the perfect balance between heartbreak and hope. And this book definitely has that. I mean, the title is Heaven, so you don't necessarily expect how dark it's gonna go. It's about bullying in particular. We're following two, I feel like they are freshman age in the US, but they're middle school in Japanese, like in Japan. I forget if that's exactly quite right, but they're like somewhere between like 8th and 9th grade. They are both bullied. It's a boy and a girl who basically meet and bond because they're both being bullied. And they find some hope in each other. It's really dark reading about the bullying and really disturbing reading about the bullying. I mean, it's another one of those. It's just like, so tender as well. The portrayal of their friendship and some of the discussions too. So I think it's called Heaven because it's about different perceptions of what heaven could mean to different people in a materialistic world. What it means to different people, and some of the ruminations were just perfect. So good, so good. So I have a quote here. We'll understand some things while we're alive and some things after we die, but it doesn't really matter when it happens. What matters is that all the pain and all the sadness have meaning. It isn't meaningless. When it's over, we'll reach a place, somewhere or something we could never reach without having gone through everything we've gone through. And that really spoke to me. I like reading books that kind of delve into suffering and how to feel about it and how to feel through it. And these kids are obviously suffering very intensely, and they find different meanings in it. There's different approaches to life, different personalities, different philosophies happening in this book and clashing in this book. But I feel like the end has a lot of hope to it. And I just loved it. This might have been my favorite book of the first quarter of the year. Maybe the second quarter of the year. It was one of my top books of the first half of the year. Like one of my top 2 or 3, I would say. Just so good. I have a live discussion of this with Alana Estelle and Michi from Heart of Michi. If you're interested, I'll try to remember to link that down below. Next, we have The Gambler by Fyodor Dostoevsky, which, is this the only classic on the list? It might be the only classic fiction anyways that I finished and ended up on this list. I did read several classics this year, but it wasn't a great year for me with classics. There weren't a ton. No, there is one more classic on here. I forgot. that I really loved. But anyways, of course, if I read a Dostoevsky, it's gonna end up here. Once again, with the endings, sometimes Dostoevsky's endings are just... the ending can completely make a novel that I wasn't like, oh my gosh, this is the best thing ever. So this one ended up being 5 stars because, for 2 reasons. Oh dear. It definitely shows what it's like to be a gambler. Like, it shows inside the headspace of a gambler extremely well. You get the heart pumping with it. It's really intense. You kind of see what attracts people to gambling, that the thoughts that are going through their heads. If you're not aware, Dostoevsky was a gambling addict. And he at one point in his life was able to just stop. And I don't know if this is exactly autobiographical, but he put a lot of himself into it. Like, I can tell. I can see it. Yeah, a young man, unsuccessful in love, of course, because aren't they all, working for the family of the woman he loves, and he ends up in casinos with gambling addicts, and it's kind of his story of the arc that he takes from... Yeah, I don't want to like spoil anything. It's not very long. It's a novella length. Like, I think it was like under 200 pages. So that's probably all I can say without spoilers. But it's very compelling. At times, it was too emotionally anguishing. There was a lot of emotional anguish. It took me a long time to finish because I was dreading certain things happening. But the ending just made it for me. So yeah, definitely recommend it even if you've never read a Dostoevsky. I feel like this one doesn't have a lot of like the philosophy and the psychology that a Dostoevsky... I would say a lot of the philosophy that a lot of Dostoevsky novels have, but the psychology is all there. It's like so psychologically interesting and morally interesting, and I think it's a good place to start with him, honestly. I would say this is a good place. When am I ever going to say it's a bad thing to start somewhere with Dostoevsky? I don't know if I've ever said that. Don't start here. I don't think I've ever said... Maybe with The Idiot, I've said don't start here. But, like, Jenny started with The Idiot and she loved it. So what do I know? But this is nice because it's short and we all have shorter attention spans these days. So I was shocked by how much I ended up loving this by the end, considering how anxiety ridden I was midway through it. It ended up being a 5-star, totally redeemed. Next we have the Pimsleur Korean audiobooks. If you're not aware, Pimsleur is a language learning company. What they do is they create these kind of ever-changing scenarios where you can practice a phrase over and over and over again, but it's not like rote memorization. It's like you're talking with someone and it's like somebody's talking to you and you're practicing the language. And it's really unique. I haven't run into a lot of places where you can practice speaking like this, like in a scenario that is feeling like real life, without actually being in real life. It feels like you're in Korea and you're practicing your Korean. It's pretty amazing. I'm addicted. I love this. I'm not quite finished with it, but I wanted to throw it in here because I'm going to be finished with it long before I do my 2025 wrap up of all my favorite things. But this has been fabulous. It's gotten me so much Korean practice. And for me, as someone, I do have social anxiety, and I don't want to force people to practice with me when I'm really slow and thinking slowly in Korean. So this gives me an outlet to kind of practice without having to bother anybody else. I haven't quite found the perfect platform to practice speaking at my own pace. So this is providing that for me. It's really, really great. I would highly recommend it. I haven't tried any other languages yet, but I'm definitely going to do the Spanish one after I'm done with the Korean one. I would say do this after you have if you are like me and speaking is your problem, like there are some people who learn to speak before they learn anything else, hardly. So if you are one of those people, I mean, do this at the very beginning and you'll probably be like, you'll like it at the beginning. But if you're like me and you're more of like a book learner and you just need practice speaking after having learned all this stuff, most of the stuff I already know, like probably 75% of what I've learned from this was like review and just practicing forming your own sentences in your mind and then saying them in a reasonable quick time frame. That takes practice. You know, it's not just recognizing it on the page or recognizing it even if someone hears it. It's actually like forming your own sentences. That actually takes practice to do it quickly. Because I write a lot of sentences. I'm pretty good at writing sentences in Korean now, at least at a basic level. But actually saying them out loud in a reasonable time frame is like something I'm very unpracticed with. So that's really what Pimsleur is great for, and I have not run into any other resources that compare. Although I did recently find a channel. Let me see if I can pull it up here. His channel is Spicy Korean, but it has an X in it rather than a C. This does something similar where he helps you practice speaking with him, and he gives you several chances to practice a phrase that he's just taught you. So that's the only thing that I can compare it to. So I'm really excited that I found his channel because that will give me some continuing practice. The only like Achilles heel of something like Pimsleur is it's limited. There's only like so many words you're going to practice with, like a couple hundred words you're going to practice and learn, like a couple grammar forms you're going to be practicing over and over again. And it's like 30-minute sessions. So you do cover a lot of ground, but then there's a lot of review and yeah. So anyways, I'm obsessed with Pimsleur. I love it so much. Okay, next we have The Perilous Gard by Elizabeth Marie Pope. I just realized one of my lights isn't on. Hopefully it's bright enough in here. This is a middle grade historical mystery fantasy. Historical fantasy with some mystery elements. It's more historical fantasy, I guess I would say. Super propulsive. I could not stop listening to this. I didn't actually know it was going to be a fantasy. I just thought it was going to be historical fiction. But what is it about? Queen? I forget what ruler it is because I just listened to it on audio. And again, history, not really my strong suit. But maybe I can just like look at it briefly. In 1558, oh yeah, the main character is exiled by Queen Mary Tudor to this remote castle known as the Perilous Gard. And so I was going in just thinking, oh, it's going to be a historical novel about this girl who's been exiled to this castle. No. It turns out to have an element of the Fae. Now, I'm not actually a person who's that interested in the Fae. That's never been a fantasy trope that I cared about really at all. There's only like one other book that I'm like, wow, the Fae are really interesting in this book. And that would be Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. Same genre, actually, historical fantasy. So this though was super compelling. So you kind of know as the main character is going to the Perilous Gard that there's this legend of a girl who disappeared, and you don't really know what happened to her for like the first maybe third of the novel, maybe half of the novel. But you find out what happened to her. And then our main girl also disappears. And we follow her throughout the disappearance while she's gone, what she's doing. It's super interesting. I think that's the mystery element, is where did the first girl disappear to? And the discovery is when our girl goes to that place where the first girl went missing. So, oh my gosh, it was so good. Great too, because it was middle grade, so it was pretty short and very plot driven. Although there's great like historical detail. there were some things that I did not see coming. Maybe I should have seen it coming, but I just enjoyed this so much. So it was a Newbery Honor book too. I can see why. Yeah, recommended. Definitely recommended. Okay, I read this for Emma's Bookish Kingdom book club, which I read. Another book on my favorites list is from that book club too. It's just, Emma just has a nose for the bangers. She can just sniff them out. And Emma just posted her 2024 favorites like today. So I'm really excited about that. I've been missing her videos. Yay. I'm glad you're back, Emma, at least for that video. Okay, next, Sherri Winston's Shark Teeth. This is another middle grade. 2 middle grades in my favorites of the years, guys. Wow. This one blew me away. Also about foster care. So we are following a girl named Sharkita who, she has a family of 3. There's 3 kids. She's the oldest. And her younger brother has special needs, and the youngest daughter is like very young. So really Sharkita's in charge because their mom basically just likes to party. She's just gotten custody of them again, and Sharkita is really determined to keep the family together, and it's a really convincing portrayal of anxiety. Sharkita has anxiety because of the situations that her mother has put her in. Sharkita's trying to keep it a secret because she doesn't want the family to go into foster care because she doesn't want them to be separated. So foster care for Sharkita is like worst case scenario. She's really afraid of it. And oh my gosh, you just fall in love with this little girl and you just want the best for her. And that for me is it. She is the heart of the novel, and that's why I gave it 5 stars. She's one of those characters that's like, I would follow you anywhere. Take me with you into books 2 and 3. I want to find out what happened. Another one that's super heartbreaking, but there's this certain community aspect about it that I think is really special. And yeah, there are reasons that people, I think, didn't rate it as highly as I did, but those are my reasons. Give me a foster care story full of heart and I'll probably rate it 5 stars, honestly. It's just a theme that's very close to my heart. So I loved this. It was so good. It was so good. Next, Dorothy L. Sayers, a biography by David Coomes. Dorothy L. Sayers by David Coomes. A Careless Rage for Life. That was the subtitle, which I love. It's directly from Dorothy L. Sayers' writings. She described herself as having a careless rage for life. This was as witty and luminescent as Dorothy L. Sayers' writing. And he quotes extensively from her letters and other writings to express her. And I loved that. I loved that he quoted her so much. And I just felt like he wasn't like, he definitely criticized her at times. There were some things that I learned about her in this book that were crazy, like legitimately crazy. Like the fact that she had a son out of wedlock and nobody knew about his existence. She kept him a secret until she died, and then he like introduced himself to all her friends and was like, actually, yeah, I'm her son. That is crazy. So yeah, she doesn't come off looking great at all times in this. But honestly, Dorothy L. Sayers is a hero of mine, and I feel like she learned life in the School of Hard Knocks, which took talent because she was a pastor's kid. You know, she was a preacher's kid. It's like, how did you go so far in the wrong direction? But at the same time, she was a working woman, and she knew that if people knew she was a mother, that would change her ability to work and write for a living. So basically, she's like, I need to provide for him. And the best way to do that is to pretend that, like, you know, I'm adopting him. I'm his, you know, aunt, or so. I forget exactly what the story was that she came up with to like convince people that it wasn't her son. So anyways, just wild character dive. And I just enjoyed this so much. I just basically listened to it. I loved it though. It was so good. It was great learning more about her. She was entertaining, and this biography was super entertaining. I rarely found my attention wandering, and I would say it's definitely listenable. If you're just somebody who likes listening to nonfiction on audio, definitely listenable. I recommend it on audiobook. Although reading it physically, I'm sure would be great too, because then you could keep track of all those quotes that I wish that I had to show you. Okay, moving on. Accountable by Dashika Slater. This is a piece of journalism about some teenagers who created a social media account and posted racist things on it and tried to keep it a secret. But of course, that kind of thing doesn't stay secret for long, and that's what these kids learn. I think the author did a really good job of treating them like kids, teenagers, they're high schoolers, still responsible for their actions, but also kids are so... You can redeem, kids can be redeemed, you know? Like, they're still growing. You have to give them space to be stupid because they're kids. And she definitely did that. So this was a Yelsa winner for excellence in nonfiction. I definitely think it deserves high praise in that sense. I found it very compelling, compulsively readable. And I feel like there's a lot of lessons to be had in here. I don't agree with like everything that the author said or all of the conclusions that she drew, but I thought she did a really good job showing how it affected the victims' lives and the people who created the account, their lives. And it shows kind of the danger of mishandling the situation, which the school did. The school at which all of this happened definitely mishandled the situation. There were some really scary moments where if you let teenagers with their emotions be in charge, it's not going to go well. You know, they do need leadership. It's a dangerous time to be a teen. It's a dangerous time to be in public school. It's a dangerous time in anybody's life. And it's a dangerous time on social media where something that you said when you were 14 online and you thought it was a funny joke, or you were making a cry for attention, or you're just trying to make your friends laugh, that can come back to bite you years later. People keep bringing it up, and it's still a problem for the kids who did this. So really interesting to follow this story. Really a warning about social media when you're a young person, the dangers of social media. And it shows how people can get sucked into these internet rabbit holes that make them believe really questionable things too. It was interesting. Very interesting story of teenagers troubled by this whole situation. Okay, next, Belinda by Maria Edgeworth. This is my favorite classic that I read this year, which is crazy because I read it in February for febregency. So I read it quite a while ago. This was our group read for febregency, and it was a banger. It was so good. It's really long, and I did not care. I raced through it. We're following Belinda, who is a young woman who's just been thrust into society, and she ends up with a questionable guardian who is trying to guide her through the dangers of being a young woman in Regency era England, through like romantic entanglements and gossip and just so many things. And I think a lot of people thought that Belinda was a bit of a flat character, but I loved Belinda. I thought she had character. I thought she was interesting. And then everybody else was like, oh, the main character is really Belinda's guardian. She's the most interesting, and she was really interesting, but she makes these really questionable choices. Like morally, I just felt like you get dragged around, and it's it's interesting. It is very interesting, and I highly recommend it. It was so entertaining, really funny, and I feel like you get a picture of the times, honestly, which is why we are reading febregency books, is really to get a picture of this time period that kind of, other than Jane Austen, not a lot of people know about Regency England. And I feel like this would be a great place to start if you've never read a Regency work outside of Jane Austen. I recommend this. I forget why it was picked exactly. I feel like possibly Jane Austen enjoyed Maria Edgeworth, and that's why Emma selected this one. And I think that's maybe why. It was a great selection. Whatever the reasoning behind it, it was a great selection. And highly recommended. Okay. Human X by Hangang is, this is probably my number 2 book of the entire year. This is historical fiction about the Gwangju uprising in South Korea. And I'm working on a dedicated review for this. I'm like 70% done with it. Hopefully I can get it out eventually. But anyways, this was really timely for me. I read this, and then shortly thereafterwards, the martial law was declared in South Korea, and it was eerie how similar the situations were. Basically, what happened in this situation is a president declares martial law so that he can take control of like the press and the rest of the government, and everybody has like a curfew. And that's what the South Korean president just recently here did again. But this time, unlike in the Gwangju uprising situation, he didn't have control over the military, and so he wasn't able to like pull off a coup. Not a coup exactly, but he was not able to wrest control from Korea's version of like Congress. What's it called? I forget what the term is. They don't have like Congress exactly, but it's really similar to Congress. So Human X follows a middle schooler boy who was at Gwangju, and this is a real story. The middle schooler did exist at the Gwangju uprising, and the author, Hangang, actually grew up in Gwangju, and she was, I think, a high schooler when this happened. She had just moved out of the house that this boy moved into, who is telling the story starting in chapter 1. It's kind of about his experience of the Gwangju uprising, and then it kind of fans out from there. His friends and family, how they feel about what he experienced there, and some of the repercussions of Gwangju throughout history. So what really happened was Gwangju was a center for pro-democracy movement in South Korea at a time when they were ruled by military dictatorships. And the government came into Gwangju and suppressed their democracy movement. And a lot of people died. Only on one side, the Gwangju uprising participants did not kill anyone. It was the government's soldiers who were ordered to kill. It was mostly students who were peacefully protesting in Gwangju. And yeah, really intense. This is super intense in a way that only Korea can be. Excuse me. Yeah, so I think I would say there's a supernatural element, but it's definitely more literary historical fiction about the kind of collective trauma and pain of that day. Highly recommend it. It was so good. If you have any interest in Korea or history in general, highly recommended. Definitely worth reading. And hopefully I'll have that review coming out for you before too long. Okay, next we have Squire by Tamora Pierce. This is a middle grade fantasy that feels a little probably more young adult than middle grade. Oh my gosh, I'm a mess. I'm sorry. I just keep dropping everything. I think I'm just sitting too far away from the camera. I'm just gonna move forward. I'm done leaning forward and whatnot. Hopefully it still looks fine. This is a fantasy, and it's following a young woman who wants to become a knight, and she's the first known female candidate to become a knight in her kingdom. And it's following her training, some of the sexism she faces. This is book 3 in the series, and it's my favorite because I think a lot of the arcs that are started in book 1 are completed in book 3. And it's very emotional. Tamora Pierce really, her goal in writing fantasy at the time was there are not a lot of female leads in fantasy. My, how things have changed. So she was really writing this to show the female experience of becoming medieval law enforcement, basically. And she does it really well. I think she creates a character who is not magical but lives in a magical world. So basically you see her steadiness as she is just really talented at the various tools of the trade and jobs that she's training to be a knight for. Like, she has to learn how to joust, and she has to face battle for the first time. And she has a head for being a commander of large groups, and that's kind of rare. And so she is sort of learning how to develop all these things, and the tactics are interesting, the battles are interesting, the magic that's surrounding her is interesting. She is interesting as a person. She doesn't have a lot of faults, I would say. And I guess that's probably one criticism you could say. But a lot of the characters who are flawed and who disagree with her on things, they're still like respected characters, even though they are flawed characters. It's like there's a lot of Snape type characters. They're not as bad as Snape is to Harry, but and Harry also hates Snape. But she does not hate people just because they mistreat her. She can see their good qualities, and so she's just a really fun character to follow around. Very steady, and I love her. The series is called Protector of the Small because there's a lot of cozy animal elements. She's like a huge animal lover. Throughout all of the early Tortallin series by Tamora Pierce, there's a lot of cozy animal stuff and also immortal animal stuff happening. So in this book, she has a griffin. I liked the older covers better, honestly. It showed kind of more of the contents of the book. But yeah, she has a griffin in this book that she's taking care of, and it's a trip, to say the least. But there's a lot of cozy elements too, to the animal life. So yeah, really, really good. I would say recommended for people who like animals in their fantasy. And the animals don't exactly talk, but they are very intelligent animals because of some of the wild magic happening. I would say this is really good for young women. I read these when I was like 9. I think I read all of them when I was 9, even though this one and the next book are a little bit more adult. They were still put in the middle grade section because women writing fantasy at the time were just put in children's literature. There wasn't really young adult literature yet. Otherwise, I think that the latter 2 books in the series might be considered young adult, but the first 2 are definitely middle grade. So it's a little bit of it's like a Harry Potter situation where she's growing up and the books kind of age up with her age. So I just love this series. This is my favorite of all the Tamora Pierce books is Squire. So it was a reread for me. I've been reading them since I was 9. Like I said, this is probably my 15th time reading them. I just love them. They're definitely favorites of the genre for me. Next, we have Compassion and Conviction. This is the And campaign, and it's written by Justin Gibney and Michael Ware. And these guys are on YouTube. Church Politics Podcast is what their YouTube is. And so their whole goal is being Christians in the public square. So they I would say probably lean Democrat, but they do not come out as like partisan. They try to come at this as Christians. They're like, as Christians, these are the situations and how the Bible speaks into these situations. And basically, neither political party completely is in line with our Christian convictions. And so it's kind of lazy to just be like Christian and Democrat or Christian and Republican and just completely vote with them all the time, basically, is kind of their thing. So compassion and conviction, meaning we should have the compassion that the Democrats are characterized by, and we should have the conviction that the Republicans are characterized by. Excuse me. My throat is rough today. So the AND campaign, and meaning both. We should have compassion and conviction. We should have a care for controlling unbridled capitalism for the benefit of the working class. And we should also have a moral basis for our beliefs, and we should act according to those morals. They shouldn't be separated. I don't have a quote for... Actually, I do have a quote. I'll just share this quote that says it all. I posted this several weeks ago on my YouTube community page, so if you want to look at it, you can. When Christians enter the political arena, we often feel like we're forced to choose between two very flawed options that compromise our beliefs. This is because the U.S. political system is dangerously polarized, and both sides frame issues to fit incomplete or dishonest narratives. When the issue isn't properly framed, there often isn't a correct answer when the issue isn't framed correctly. America's current political system separates love from truth, compassion from conviction, and social justice from moral order, as if they're somehow at odds with one another. People who support social justice issues generally don't support traditional views of morality, and vice versa. But there's no clear reason why those two stances should be separate. Many Christians are conflicted because they believe in freedom, moral order, justice, equality, and inclusion. Christians must be critical thinkers and question the assumptions and conclusions presented to us. We shouldn't simply accept the issues as they've been framed by political parties, ideological tribes, or the media, because these sources usually aren't analyzing the issues from the standard of the gospel. And then he quotes several verses. In Ephesians 4:14, Paul informs the church that mature believers are not easily influenced or deceived like children. Then we will no longer be infants, tossed back and forth by the waves, and blown here and there by every wind of teaching, and by the cunning and craftiness of people in their deceitful scheming. And he goes on. I really appreciated that he had so many examples from scripture and history. They had so many examples from scripture and history supporting their perspectives on things. It really helps you think about things from the perspective of Christianity rather than like ideological stances of parties. That's what they're really against, is just being like, oh yeah, one party is right about everything. They're like, no, that's not true. So let me read you the chapter titles here. Church and politics, church and state, compassion and conviction, partnerships and partisanships. Oh yeah, there was some interesting advice for how to get involved with politics and not compromise your convictions, but still be effective and really, really interesting stuff. I loved this, and I read this with Faith's Theology Book Club, which is in her Discord, Faith and Books, which I will link down below. So thank you so much to Faith for recommending these guys and their book, because it helped me with some of my anxiety over politics. It gives me kind of permission to vote with my convictions rather than what other people are convicted about. Because you're going to be voting with somebody's values. Either you vote with your own values or you vote with somebody else's values. That was really helpful for me, because sometimes I feel like, I don't know, I shouldn't be like forcing my values on other people, and they're like, that's not what you're doing. Our country was founded with certain values in mind, and they're drawn from the Bible. So it's not like you're forcing something unwanted on people. They are here and they live in this country and they value this country because they share certain values. So it's okay to stand up for what's right, even if not everybody agrees with you. So yeah, I found that very helpful, that perspective. Okay, moving on, and let's talk about Patriot by Alexei Navalny, which is my number one book of the year. I knew when I heard about this book, it was my number one most anticipated book of the year, and there was good reason for that. So Alexei Navalny was a Russian political activist. He did try to run for president, but because the Russian system is so corrupt, they did not allow him to run. They kept trumping up charges against him. So when he was in his 40s, he was finally imprisoned. There were several attempts made on his life, and one of them involving nerve gas. It hit him when he was on an airplane, and he almost died on the airplane, but he was eventually moved to Germany, where he received medical treatment for several months, and he finally recovered. And everybody was asking him, are you going to go back to Russia? Are you going to go back to Russia? Because he was basically exposing the corruption of Russian officials all the time. On his YouTube channel and through his writings, he had a really popular blog where he would be like, yeah, this guy, this is the salary that this guy is supposed to earn from the Russian government for his political work. This is the house that he owns in Southern California, or in Malibu. It's like, okay, does his government salary match up with this $5 million home in California that he owns? No. So where's the money coming from? Where is he getting this money? And he would point out things like that, like Putin's palaces. He would point out these guys should not be able to afford a palace, and obviously that put a target on his back, and he was put in Russian prison because he went back to Russia. He got really annoyed with people for asking him, are you going to go back to Russia? Because he's like, I want to live in this country and I want to speak my mind. And if that means I get killed for it, so be it. And he says stuff like that multiple times in this book. So it's really emotional knowing what happened to him, because he was prophetic. He was killed by Putin in prison. He was murdered in prison. Murder in prison is not at all uncommon in Russia, especially in the areas where he was sent. And he had so many rights violated. Like, it was just so corrupt. They just were basically trying to silence him because he was still getting his lawyers, Instagram posts and stuff. He was still posting even from prison. And I think that's why they eventually killed him. Is because he would not stop talking. He would not shut up. And so basically the first part of this book is him explaining how he was poisoned, and it explains his growing up years, which was really interesting because I had never really read about a modern person growing up in Russia. And it talks about his convictions. Eventually it talks about his faith. I had no idea he was a Christian until like 3/4 of the way through the book. I was like, what? You were a Christian? So I'm kind of excited. I think he's probably in heaven right now. Or with God. Or I will get to talk to him one day. Wherever people go while they're waiting for the new heaven and the new earth. So he had such an incredibly clear vision of what was right. And basically he said, I knew from the outset that I would be imprisoned for life, either for the rest of my life or until the end of the life of this regime. I have always thought and said openly that being a believer makes it easier to live your life and, to an even greater extent, engage in opposition politics. Faith makes life simpler. because he knew what was right. And even if he was killed because he was doing what was right, it was still the right thing to do. And he was very just clear-eyed about that. And it was super emotional. Like, I cried a lot. And I'm actually really upset that he was killed. But at the same time, this book is his memorial, and also the proceeds from the book are going to support his family in the week of his death. So I got it for Christmas because I got an Amazon gift card for Christmas. So it's on the way. I'm going to own this book and probably reread it a bunch because I highlighted the entire thing. There was so much about Russia and political philosophy in there that was just so interesting and so good. I would highly recommend it if you're interested in Russia and the modern state of Russia. He also talks about a lot of communist history in there and what corruption looks like, how to identify it. And yeah, whenever I get back to learning Russian, I'm definitely going to check out his YouTube channel. Hopefully it's still there at that point. I'm afraid that Russia is going to somehow take it down. But they haven't yet. His team is still posting. So maybe I'll actually get to listen to them. Hopefully I can. Anyways, I should probably just watch them in English while they're up there. And then if I get a chance, when I'm back to learning Russian, I can use them for practice. Anyways, okay, next, Stalin, Man of Steel. This was another Red September read. This is a podcast by Sharon McMahon, so it's actually not a book. But it was like I was listening to an audiobook. And it's a biography of Stalin. And it was really interesting. Like, I did not know, like, Stalin and the Nazis. Like, I didn't know that there was history of them together. Like, there was so much interesting stuff in this. It starts when he's young, and it talks about his different marriages, his children. I feel like I got to know his daughter a lot better and her story. Like, she came to America. I did not know this. It was like, what? Yeah. So, okay, let me see. Does it? No. Okay. I was going to see if the titles of the episodes could kind of give you an idea, but yeah, it's just about his life. And yeah, apparently Joseph Stalin was not his first name, and he was actually not born in Russia. He was born, it wasn't Ukraine, was it? I can't remember. It was another country that he was actually born in. And he was born in a very poor family. And it was interesting kind of hearing the makings of a dictator. How did this happen? How did this guy get in charge? Really, really fascinating. Okay. The History of the Russian Revolution by Leon Trotsky, which I'm actually still only halfway through. So I feel a little bit like a poser by saying this. But it took up a lot of my year, like 6 months of my reading life. And it was so worth it. I honestly loved this, and I definitely want to finish it. This was a We Love Jenny pick. Maybe, honestly, I might pick it back up here. I've just finished like 3 nonfiction books that I've been working on. I think I just needed a break. It is very heavy. It's almost like reading a doctoral thesis. It's a very in-depth examination of the Russian Revolution. Like, it goes into the same events from different perspectives, like from the people's perspective, from the government's perspective, from like you see things from multiple angles. And I think Leon Trotsky did have some axes to grind. Like, he really hated Stalin. But I also feel like it was a really good introduction to the history. I mean, like, you can read other books after reading this, but it will be like, it'll be emblazoned on your brain, his perspectives, because he is very lucidly explaining things from his own perspective. So I would definitely say probably read some other histories alongside of this, which you're probably going to do if you're reading this, because you're probably like a super ultra fan of the history if you're reading this, because it's like 2,000 pages or something. So yeah, I would say don't maybe read this alone, but I would say it's a fine place to start if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty history. Just don't make this the only thing you ever read on the subject or you ever listen to, I would say. But I would say he's pretty objective. Honestly, he's a really good historian. And I fact-checked a lot of things just by reading Britannica along with it. It is, though, like reading a doctoral thesis. It's very wordy and exact. And there's a lot of concepts that he's trying to get across. But well worth reading. I'm enjoying this so much. I was doing a readathon for We Love Jenny because we were supposed to buddy read this. So Tony and I went ahead and did a bunch of live streams reading about our thoughts on this. And Tony went ahead and finished it. And I'm still only halfway through. So hopefully, maybe this year I can finish it. I'm hoping that I can now that I have some readathons off my plate, and I would really love to finish it. But I really wanted to talk about it because it did take up so much of my reading year. And honestly, any history you read, you're reading history. You don't actually have to finish the whole book to actually learn something about the history of an event. That's the nice thing about nonfiction. I wish I could just listen to the rest, but it's not really a book that I can just listen to. If you're really familiar with the history, you probably could just listen to it, but it's too in-depth and detailed, and I would miss too much if I just listened to it. So I have to read it with my eyes. So I read half of it with my eyes, and I will finish it. I will finish it one day. Okay. Revelation, the book of Revelation in the Bible. I reread this multiple times this year because I was reading it for multiple different things. And honestly, I think that's a new favorite way to read the Bible is just read it over and over and over again, because then you remember the details. It enriches the rest of your scriptural reading. You learn it better if you read it over and over and read a bunch of resources about it. You just become really familiar with it. And that's what happened with Revelation and me this year. I'm on a bit of a journey, kind of figuring out what I believe that Revelation is trying to express to believers, but a lot of it is gray area, if you know what I mean. And this was timely as well for me because this was one of Jenny's it was one of the most interesting books in the Bible to her as well. We talked about it on more than one occasion and we're fascinated by it. The pre-trib, the millennium, the 1,000-year thing. I mean, there's like, what is this imagery saying? Like, there's so much to think about and learn about when it comes to Revelation. And, oh man, it's well worth checking out. And you get a new view of Jesus too. It's like, it gives you a really different interpretation of Jesus after reading this, because it's the second coming of Christ. And the second coming is really different than the first coming. So yeah, Revelation, really enjoying reading that. I'm still going over it with a friend, so I'll probably just need to reread the whole thing once again and become even more familiar with it. Okay, next, Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton. This is a sci-fi thriller. We're getting to the end here. We only have 2 more after this. This is a sci-fi thriller that the entire time I was riveted. Wow, this was so good. It really talks about the danger of having technology in the hands of people with no training in ethics and morality. And we read this for Emma's Bookish Kingdom book club, and her brother was there, who is a paleontologist, I think. And it was interesting because all of the English majors that were there had received some training in ethics and morality, and her brother hadn't, at least not in school, you know. He's Catholic, so I think he's Catholic. So I think that he has some training in ethics and morality, but it was just interesting that I think Michael Crichton has a point here. If you are going to be doing these crazy things, scientific technologies, and changing the world so drastically, making decisions for lots of other people that's going to affect all those other people, you should have some training in ethics and morality. You should have a basis for your beliefs, what is right and what is wrong. You should know this stuff before doing something as dangerous as creating a park of dinosaurs. In this case, everybody knows the premise of Jurassic Park, of course. It's not a secret anymore because of the movies. popularized it, obviously. I love the movie. I love the book. Equally as good. This is more in depth. But the movie is philosophical too. Honestly, I definitely, if you like the movie, would recommend reading the book. Really, really enjoyed this. And also the audiobook is great because it's narrated by Scott Brick. And I love Scott Brick. Scott Brick is a great narrator. So yeah, I recommend the audiobook. But you'll probably hone in on more of the philosophy if you just read it. But anyways. Okay, next. Hand-Drawn Tools in the Doctrine of Labor Saving by Wendell Berry. This is an essay. And I have it in his collected... his World Ending Fire collection, which is like his best essays collected. And I read several essays from maybe just 2 or 3 with Faith from Faith and Books this year. And this was one that her collection had and my collection had. So it was one of the ones we read. And boy, am I glad that we read it. It gave me a lot of food for thought. So Hand-Drawn Tools in the Doctrine of Labor Saving. He is arguing that just because technology can speed things up doesn't mean we should use it, because sometimes technology creates lesser quality, where quality is what matters most. Basically, he says, like, the coming of the tractor made it possible for a farmer to do more work, but not better. And there comes a point, as we know, where more begins to imply worse. So he was very critical. I think this essay was like in the 70s when he wrote it, it's a while ago. And I think things have changed for the better a little bit. Like there are more like small farmers doing the work of raising crops that are better quality rather than quantity, emphasizing quality over quantity. So I think writings like his actually have made a difference. There's like an organic movement and stuff. However, we still have a long way to go. Like, I think about this a lot because I do have there's a lot of food in America that sets my body off. In particular, I can't eat a lot of food in America. I know that in other countries, people with diseases like mine can go to those countries and still eat their food, and they can eat almost unrestrictedly because there's just something wrong with American food. I don't really get it, but I think we're prioritizing profits and the amount over the quality of the food. Sorry for all the coughing. I've been sick a bunch of times this winter. So yeah, I guess I would say, are we better off for the mechanization of farming? That's the question he was asking. And I think it's still worth asking, honestly. I do kind of think he has some points. There's more points that he makes in here. It was really an interesting read, because I think we probably were happier and a happier and healthier community when more of us were working the land and producing good food and actually eating food rather than eating like manufactured products, cheese product. I think we were probably happier and healthier when we were doing physical outdoor labor to make ourselves stronger, but also just to provide. It was just necessary. We could eat more. We got natural exercise in. Instead of crowding into the cities and doing like technology type jobs, which, I mean, I do that, but that's partly because I have a chronic illness. I don't really have a choice. I have to do a technology job. That's just how it is. But, yeah, I just think efficiency doesn't make things better if it sacrifices quality. I think that's what he's trying to get across, and he got it across really well, and I totally agree with him about that. And he had some other interesting things to say too, like about homeschooling and stuff like that. It was interesting. It was like a really good food for thought, and I just enjoy Wendell Berry's nonfiction more than his fiction, honestly, but that might just be because I'm more of a nonfiction person these days. I still enjoy fiction, and I need to read fiction for relaxation. I heard this recently that reading fiction actually is good for relaxation. It helps you sleep better. I think that's true for me. I need fiction in my life to relax. But anyways, okay, and the last book for today. Woo! We made it. Thanks for hanging around this long. I did not expect to be like 2 hours. The Quiet American by Graham Greene. This is an American literary fiction classic set in Saigon. It's set during the Vietnam War, and it really poses the question, how many, innocent civilians are killed before we say this war is no longer moral. This person's motive's no longer moral. I just feel like he has such a way of showing morality in like a really fiery way that makes you question everything. He's very successful at, he is an author of faith. I think he's Catholic, and he just has this way of bringing his beliefs across in the most flawed characters that it really makes you think. Like, he has such a strong moral vision to his work, I would say. And that is what is so attractive to me. I love an author with a strong moral vision, especially if there's things that I agree with them about. If they're not something that I can agree with them about in their moral vision, then their moral vision can honestly seem preachy. But in this case, that is obviously not the case with this. I mean, there's things that I don't agree with him about as well, but how many dead colonels justify a child's or a rickshaw driver's death when you are building a national democratic front? So this book is following Pyle, an American in the war, who is incompetent, to put it mildly. He is murdered, and we see the stories through the eyes of a British reporter who does not like Pyle for multiple reasons, his incompetence being one of them. And I just felt like the setting was so engrossing, and I just can't stop thinking about the morality. Like I said, in these books, you really, I find it riveting. And, but he makes it hard to cast judgment on the characters, even when they're really flawed, because everybody is so messed up. There's not one character in here where you're just like, oh yeah, they're on target. No, none of them are on target. They're all messed up. So yeah, I like that kind of a book, honestly, that grapples with morality. Because sometimes I feel like today's books, the morality is boring. It's really plain vanilla, on the surface, no gray at all. Yeah, this book is not like that. It's a very like gray morality type book. It explores the gray. And it doesn't hurt that I was riveted by the soap opera. Pyle and the British reporter are actually fighting over a Vietnamese woman that they both love or think that they love. So that is that. We made it. Thank you guys for sticking around. I don't know how many books that was, but that was a lot. And I'm going to go before I lose my voice entirely. But let me know down below your favorite books that you read in 2024, books that you'd recommend to me or not. And yeah, I'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks again for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.